and welcome to Faith Life Family. I'm Missy DeConti, back from a long summer vacation. Just wanted to let you know that my shows are going to be coming on kind of sporadically. I'm going to be spending a little bit more time with my family and a little bit more time behind the camera, co-producing some shows that I'm really thrilled about. One is, you may remember my guest, Hugh Owen, who did the study for creation with the Colby Center. We are blessed to have had him accept our invitation to have a show. He's already had one already. If you haven't seen it, be sure to check it out on our Fiat Ministry Network.tv website, where he'll be inviting guests once a month at least from throughout the world, from the Colby Center, scientists, just a wealth of information that you'll be getting on creation. We need to know the truth. And that's what we're trying to do at Fiat. We're really trying to make it more of a Catholic learning channel. As you know, with my shows, I'm always trying to teach you something, but I thought it would be nice for you to hear from others. So stay tuned, be checking us. We're always going to be having new guests and new shows. So tonight is no exception. Tonight, we have a returning guest who gave us a wonderful presentation on the Shroud of Turin, Mr. Bryan Walsh. Now, he's going to be discussing something that's on everyone's mind, and that is the signs in the heavens. You know, we've been hearing so much about the Jewish calendar and the blood moon and the earthquakes and the floods and the total eclipse of the sun. We're getting it from so many different perspectives, but I thought it was important to have it from a Catholic perspective. And thanks be to God, we have Bryan, who has taken the time to compile all of this information, to do lots of research, and to give us the perspective that we need. It's for your discernment, but nevertheless, it's going to be a fabulous show. We're also going to be having it available on DVD. So if you don't have time to take down all the notes, and believe me, it's going to be a lot of information. I've seen the presentation. It's fabulous, but it's a lot to take in. So be sure to get your piece of paper and pen ready. But also, if you'd like to get a DVD of this program, feel free to email me at missy@flfware.com or our producer, Kent, at fiatministrynetwork.tv. So without further ado, I'd like to bring on the show now, Mr. Bryan Walsh. Welcome again, Bryan.
Hey, Missy, how are you? Good to see you.
It's great to see you again, too. Well, I've got to say that I was so thrilled to have you at our parish giving the presentation, but sadly, I was busy running in and out of the room because it was standing room only in the back, and I was getting chairs for the first 20 minutes. So I think selfishly, I'm having you on again so that I can actually hear the full presentation, because it was rich. It was dynamite.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
Hopefully people will find it interesting.
Oh, well, they will, I'm sure. Well, and just to kind of give a little bit of what it's going to be, the first portion of it, was it the first half or 3/4 of it, is basically laying the groundwork as to where in the Bible and where in history, why we should be paying attention to the signs that we're receiving now. Is
That's correct. That's exactly correct. What we try to do with this is, in the first roughly 2/3 of the presentation, is lay out some events that happened in the past, see what the Bible was describing, and then whatever the Bible was describing, then show you with modern science, et cetera, what actually was occurring at the time. And based upon some of these findings, the past is rather interesting, and it actually tells us a lot about the present and implies a lot about the future. So that's the reason I did this way back when, in last year. We had originally started this study doing a study of the Star of Bethlehem. Since we run the Shroud Center during the Christmas season, not too many people want to come in and see the Shroud of Turin images, but a lot of them are interested in the Star of Bethlehem. So we did some research, found some fascinating facts, and then with those fascinating facts, extended it in January and February of this year, and came to this presentation we have now back in February. And unfortunately or fortunately, some of the things the presentation was pointing towards have already begun to happen.
Yes. And now people are not to confuse this with astrology. Totally different. Right?
Totally and completely different. We'll take you through a little bit of why when we go on the presentation. But if you're looking for me to give you a horoscope, forget about it.
That's right. Darn, yeah. No, that's good. And that's exactly why we're having you on, because I think there is a little bit of confusion. And, you know, there's so many roads where you can kind of stray a little bit when people are hearing all about the stars and, you know, the moon and the planet is they can go in the wrong direction. You know, we all flash back to the 70s and start thinking, you know, Virgo and Leo and no, this is why we're having you on. So, but before we get started, we will say a Hail Mary, but before that, let me just clarify. I'm not going to be interrupting the way I normally do and ask you questions throughout the presentation. I will remain silent. I will be biting my tongue and save my questions until the end of the presentation so that you can fit in as much as you possibly can. And then the questions will begin. And if anyone has anything that they would like to ask, feel free to join the chat room. If you're watching live right now, put on the questions that you'd like for us to ask, and I will do my best. I'll put the glasses on and make sure that I ask Bryan before the show is over. Okay, so
very good.
Okay, so let's begin, since this is, of course, the 100th year anniversary of Our Lady of Fatima. Let's pray to Our Lady a Hail Mary, okay?
Right. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Our Lady of Fatima, please pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, Bryan, take it away. I'm off screen. See ya. I'll be taking notes. Go ahead.
See you later, Missy.
Okay.
Okay, what we're going to go through today is the heavens and what they tell us about God's communication with us. As Missy mentioned, this is not about astrology at all. This is about the heavens being used the way God intended them to be used. They declare the work of his hands, and they declare his glory, as Psalms points out. And if we look in Genesis, we see in the scriptures, God said, let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. Notice God didn't say, let them tell you what you're going to become when you grow up. They're meant to be signs so that we can study the skies and try to understand what God is trying to tell us. And shortly, we'll take you through some scriptural quotes that actually point to this very fact. But I hope to encourage in everybody today several things, but one of which is to look in the heavens, because the heavens are always communicating to us something about God's will. And in addition, as you look at them and see the magnificence of them and the extent of them, you begin to get a sense of who our Lord and God is. He is awesome, eternal, almighty, and everlasting. One of the people I like to quote when talking about these subjects is St. John Paul II. He said, in the designs of providence, there are no mere coincidences. So looking at the heavens connects with things on earth in some way, and in those are the ways we have to try to discern. So to start off, we'll talk a little bit about what astrology is. And essentially, it's a belief that the stars are the cause of events and actions on earth. It's obviously a belief outlawed in many faiths because they didn't believe in that kind of approach to what the heavens were about. But really, if you think about it from a physical and sort of actual point of view, realistic point of view, the stars are light years away from the earth. While they may be massive, their distances are extraordinary. And as a result, their ability to affect us directly as the way that's belief would have you follow them doesn't make much sense. However, in Scripture, it says something quite different. It says that God can use the heavens as signs to communicate with us, as basically visible signs of what his will is at the time we're looking at them. And in Job, for example, Job talks about he is the maker of the Bear and Orion, the Pleiades, and the constellations of the south. He's talking about signs in the heavens. The maker of the Bear and Orion are signs that are close to the plane of the ecliptic. They're close to something called the zodiac today. They knew about it in the time that Job's book was written. So clearly, there's a connection between the heavens and the formations of the stars there and what God wishes to communicate to us. That's emphasized in Psalm 19. It says, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. They're heard everywhere. Their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the end of the world. The psalmist tells us that, and then St. Paul in Romans reminds us of it. In Romans 10:17, he says, consequently, faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word of Christ. But I ask, did they, the Jews, not hear? Of course they did. Their voice has gone out to all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. So Paul is reflecting back to the Psalms, saying that the skies at the time the Jews were hearing him had proclaimed the existence, the majesty, and the coming of the Christ. And yet some of them didn't hear, probably because many of them weren't looking at the sky. They had belief in that particular condition and trait had dissipated over the years. Likewise today, if you live in a city in the U.S. or any place in the world, your ability to see the sky is greatly limited. So if you go out into the country, you can see it, but having not seen it for so long, you may not understand what you're looking at. So at the end of this, I'll be mentioning some of the programs you can actually get to put on your computer that are free that will begin to teach you about the skies. And once they teach you, you can begin to cogitate on them and reflect on them and meditate on them to see if God has got a message in there for the world. And lastly, Jesus said through the Gospel of Luke, there will be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars. So clearly signs were intended by God from the beginning. It's this malpractice of astrology that has caused people to lose the knowledge of this. Signs in the heavens were occasionally accompanied by key events in the past. In the time of the prophet Jonah, for example, the Assyrian Empire was the major regional power with one of its principal cities in the Nineveh district, which is near present-day Mosul. In fact, it's a suburb of Mosul, a northern suburb of Mosul. And at the time, it was a major enemy of the nation of Judah, Israel. And it was located, see if I can get it to show it to you on the screen. It was located up along the rivers up here in the northern part of the empire. Here's Mosul, and this is where Nineveh would have been. And it will become important later on in terms of some of the events that occurred there. But one of the events was the event that occurred to Jonah. We'll talk about that in a second. The interpretation of these events developed over a period of hundreds of years. The Assyrians, who had basically absorbed the Babylonian Empire, came to know the various objects in the heavens through designs in the heavens that were originally developed, we think, by the Sumerians, and then expanded upon by the Babylonians and others of the era. For example, the star Regulus, which we call Regulus, which is the brightest star in the constellation of Leo, was considered the regal star. Spica, the brightest star in the constellation of Virgo, the Virgin, was associated with harvests and grains. Each of these bright stars had special connections with events that occurred on Earth. And over time, the Sumerians had passed on their lore to the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Medes, all of whom incorporated this knowledge into a series of what they called omens back in the day. They developed these omens using their extensive catalog of heavenly events, as I said, going back hundreds of years. For example, solar and lunar eclipses were generally thought to be indicators of destruction and tumult to come, and in various cultures were thought to reflect the anger of the gods. In many cultures, the solar eclipse was thought to indicate that the sun was being devoured, and as a result, disaster and destruction were soon to follow. the king and the nation. Comets were also infrequent but fear-inspiring heavenly events. And there's actually a real reason for this, which we'll talk about toward the end of the presentation. But they were thought to be portent tragic and destructive events. So the question was there anything unusual occurring near Nineveh close to the time that we think Jonah visited it? It was near the height of their power that Jonah was asked to warn the Assyrians of their impending doom. And since Assyria was a major enemy of Israel, Jonah declined the invitation from God and decided to go west, young man. He sailed to the other end of the Mediterranean, or at least he attempted to, and in his passage was thrown overboard by his shipmates because he had caused such tempests in the sea, and eventually was coughed up by the big fish, thrown back on the shore of Israel or that area, and asked by God again to visit the Ninevites, which he eventually did. And he went as a single man. So the screen shows us, first of all, the Assyrian cylinders showing a fish man who were thought to be Adapa Onans, who were standing below the sun god Shamash. Some researchers from the 1990s on have begun to wonder if there's a connection with the Jonah story in some of these images. Here's a modern icon showing Jonah emerging from the big fish, ready to go to the Ninevites and tell them that destruction was about to follow. But the question I asked when I read the story, after hearing it read in the church, was why would the Assyrians bother to listen to the warnings of a single Hebrew, a known enemy? Did something cause them to be willing to listen? The two questions I just posed were answered and addressed in 1978, which I found out by doing some research, at a lecture given by Assyriologist and former curator of the British Museum, Donald Weissman. Weissman concluded that only a heavenly sign could have caused the Assyrian population of Nineveh to be so responsive to Jonah's call to repentance. And again, I urge you to go on the internet. You can research this yourself and read the text that he wrote for his talk. It talks about all the various aspects of this. He says, it talks about in his paper that the king's response of abandoning his throne and removing his royal garb, as described in the book of Jonah, was precisely what you would expect based upon the Assyrian tablets if a total eclipse of the sun had taken place. For in the Assyrian Enuma Anu Enlil, on tablets 16 to 22, are described the impact of an eclipse which turns day into night. We'd now call that a total solar eclipse. Such eclipses were always pointed to major public disasters in which the king of the country would be deposed and killed, rains from heaven would cause great floods, there would be famines, and city walls would be destroyed. Now, if you look at recent times, what's happened after the eclipse in the United States, there certainly have been floods in the country, great floods of record proportion caused by some of the storms we recently had. So in one sense, the Assyrian tablets foretold something that occurred in the U.S. What's interesting is, in the old days, in the time of the Assyrian kings, the king would, knowing that the eclipse either had occurred or was about to take place, would abandon his throne, would take off his garb, would dress like a civilian, a plebeian, and basically hide until such time as danger had passed, roughly 2 to 3 months after the solar eclipse had occurred. To cover for the fact that the king was no longer there, they'd appoint somebody from the populace to be king for that 3 months. He'd be dressed in kingly garb, adorned with all the rights of a king, given food, etc., that a king would have. However, at the end of the 2 or 3 months, the king would have him killed. He'd resume his throne and continue his rule. What happened at the time of Jonah was the total solar eclipse of June 15th, 763 BC. If you look at the map over here, here's the city of Mosul, which is in the process of being liberated right now from ISIS, with Nineveh just north of it. And unfortunately for the folks in Mosul and for the tablets, etc., that were in ISIS, that were in Nineveh, they were likely partially destroyed at least. We don't know what became of them. Some of them were probably sold. So we have some of the records we had of the Assyrian Empire have now been destroyed. If you look at the map below that, you can see the city of Mosul down below it here. Up here would be where Nineveh would be at the time. And the lower band there is the band that is the area where total solar eclipse could be seen. So in Nineveh would have been a 99.4% total eclipse of the sun, would have been seen by the Assyrians as extremely ominous. To cap it off, at around the same time, we're not sure exactly what time, roughly 760 BC, give or take 30 years, based upon the precisions we can have, there was a major earthquake which occurred in what is now northern Lebanon, up in this area, up in here. That earthquake was a magnitude 8.2 event and was likely felt over at least a 300-kilometer range and would have been felt in Nineveh. So the Ninevites, either before or just after this eclipse, would have experienced a major earthquake. There had been reports of rebellions in the countryside and plagues. So they were more than willing to listen to somebody who came in as these events either were occurring or had just occurred. And the king's behavior indicated they had just occurred, and the eclipse is what made Jonah welcome Nineveh. To interpret all these heavenly omens for the king, a guild of priests had developed over the hundreds of years prior, called the Baru. The most senior of the Baru were called the Magos, who were advisors to the king. They were part of an advisory body to the king that not only advised him, but chose his successor. So the song, "We Three Kings of Orient Are," is actually based on the Magos, which in the Greek we translate as Magi, who were the advisors to the Assyrian kings, who were not kings themselves, but senior advisors, and the connection with the king came because of their advisory role. About 160 years after Jonah walked through Nineveh, Nebuchadnezzar II, the king of the Babylonian Empire, conquered Jerusalem and took some of its inhabitants into captivity. Among these captives was a wealthy young religious man named Daniel. Now, the king's chief eunuch renamed all these men, but they kept their Israeli name, the Jewish name, amongst themselves. And Daniel wrote a book, or somebody wrote it for him later on, of what he saw and heard while he was in the kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel was given the gift of interpreting dreams and was thought to be well educated. And because of this, the king made him the Rab-Mag, the leader of the Magi, the wise men. So he became the leader of the Magi because he was able to interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dreams. And there's a series of stories. I encourage everybody to read the book of Daniel about Daniel's adventures dealing with Nebuchadnezzar and the subsequent kings of the empire, including later on Cyrus. In this role, he would also teach the Magi about the revelations of his God. So the Magi came to know the scriptures as they were developed at that point, of the stories in the Jewish tradition that were around that Daniel could reflect to them. They would be taught about the coming of a most holy anointed one of the Jewish people based on one of Daniel's dreams. This is in the book of Daniel, and Daniel 9:20, and it goes, 70 weeks are declared for your people and for your holy city. Then transgression will stop and sin will end. Guilt will be expiated. Everlasting justice will be introduced. Vision and prophecy ratified, and a most holy will be anointed. Know and understand this. This is the timing piece. From the utterance of the word that Jerusalem was to be rebuilt until one who was anointed and a leader, there shall be 7 weeks. If you've been to church in the mornings these past few weeks, you've heard these scriptures read to you from the altar during the week. During 62 weeks, it shall be rebuilt, with streets and trenches in a time of affliction. After the 62 weeks, An anointed one shall be cut down when he does not possess the city. And the people of a leader who comes shall destroy the sanctuary at a later time. Analyzing this text, a number of scholars have analyzed it. It seems to point to two different anointed ones. The first anointed is a leader who is to be anointed, whom Isaiah describes as Cyrus, a leader anointed by God, Isaiah 45:1, which occurred 49 years after God spoke to Jeremiah, Jeremiah 33:10, which appears to match the first anointed prophecy. So the weeks are described there. Each day is a year. So 7 weeks of days is 49 years. So the first prophecy was fulfilled as Jeremiah describes. The second anointed prophecy, the anointed who was cut off, is a bit more difficult since it's not obvious precisely when this time frame should begin. It's likely that King Artaxerxes, whatever his name is, decree to rebuild Jerusalem in about 444 BC is what started that clock. We can't be exactly sure. Scholars who've looked at this have actually gone back and reconstructed the calendar that was used in those days, which were lunar calendars, and adjusted it for corrections, et cetera, that were necessary. And when they did all their arithmetic, which would take you several pages just to show you, they come to a date that the anointed one would be cut off in 33, what we call 33 AD now. However, from the Magi's point of view, at the time that Daniel told them the story, they would know that a man anointed by Daniel's God was to come about 490 years in the future, and they would look for signs of his coming, because Daniel would have told them to look for him. Daniel would give them further insight drawn from the scriptures that he knew so well. In the book of Numbers, which is from the Torah, it says, I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not near. A star shall rise out of Jacob, and a scepter shall spring up from Israel, and shall strike the chiefs of Moab, and shall waste all the children of Seth. This is in Numbers 29. The Magi were thus most likely told to look for a star, though Daniel couldn't tell them exactly when or where it might appear. But they would be on the lookout, and given the fact that they were some of the best astronomers in the world, they'd look for as long as they needed. By the time of the Caesars, the Magi were the best astronomers in the world and watched the sky continuously to see what the heavens look like at that time, the expected time for the coming of the Anointed One. We need to first estimate when it might have occurred to sort of shorten our presentation, because we could look at the sky through each year, obviously. First of all, many scholars, and we'll go through some of the methodology, we go through a lot of more detail on this in our presentations on the Star of Bethlehem. But to sort of give you a shorthand version, the Jewish historian Josephus is key. He describes events surrounding the death of the King Herod, and we know of Herod from the scriptures as well, as a despot who ruled Jerusalem at the time of the anointed birth. Herod died after a lunar eclipse and before the celebration of Passover. The timing of that has been a subject of some debate in scholarly circles, but we'll skip to the end to tell you what we came up with. Since Jesus was born before Herod died, the eclipse mentioned by Josephus can help define the likely period of the anointed's birth. Because, to make the story quick, the anointed one in Greek is called the Christos, the Christ. Jesus, the Christ, is the same as the anointed one here. There are two possible eclipses that seem to fit this, and that were visible in Israel around the same time frame you'd be looking for. The first was the partial lunar eclipse of March 14th, 4 BC, and the second was the full lunar eclipse on January 10th, 1 BC. The partial lunar eclipse in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, and even 90s, was thought to be the one that was relevant because of some scholarly misinterpretations of some things that needed to occur at the death of a Roman king. To make a long story short, it's the full lunar eclipse on January 10th that's the relevant one, since it was full and lunar, and since the time period involved for the death of a king in a part of the Roman Empire would take a number of months. the time period involved was the only time period that would fit the description in Josephus. So we know from that point that the Anointed One was likely born in the 2-year period, roughly, prior to January 10th, 1 BC. That also tells us something about the timing of Christmas and also the timing of the killing of the innocents. So let's go now to Bethlehem, roughly 2,000 years ago. And this is on August 12th, 3 BC, just at dawn. And we see in the sky that constellation many people can see around the world, the constellation of Orion, right, or the bull, sometimes called. Down here, we see just above the horizon, what you can't see here very easily, it's 2 stars, what appear to be stars, so close together they look like one. They're very bright. When we take a closer view of that sky on August 12th, we show a very, very close conjunction of the planet we now call planet Venus and the planet Jupiter. Jupiter was the king star, don't forget, and Venus the mother or woman star in the constellation of Leo, the Regal's constellation, over the regal star down here of Regulus. So we have in the skies a sign that would definitely get the attention of the Magi if they were looking at the sky at the time. Further, during September 3 BC, there was another unique alignment of the stars which could be seen all over the Middle East. The conjunction of Jupiter, remember that king star again, with Regulus, which was obviously the brightest star in the constellation Leo, and thought of the royal star. So from the Magi's point of view, a royal king was born or about to be born, and that would be confirmed to them by the position of the mother star, Venus, in the constellation of the Virgin, the woman, Virgo, who was a symbol of fertility in the Assyrian panoply of skies. So from their point of view, it would seem to point to the birth of a royal king. And it would have occurred, if they're correct, on September 11th, 3 BC, near dusk. Further, beyond that, in another unusual occurrence, Jupiter, the king star, who's now the star of, if we're right, above the Anointed One, went very near Regulus, in conjunction, they call it today, 3 times over an 8-month period, starting in September 3rd to 3 BC. September 3 BC. The first one was on September 14th, right after we saw the birth of that king, which occurred on the Jewish feast of Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Trumpets and the beginning of the Jewish New Year. So the skies proclaimed the Feast of Trumpets after the birth of the anointed king. It was the beginning of the Jewish New Year in this particular year and the beginning of a new era. In addition, on the second conjunction, on February 17th of 2 BC, which was the Jewish Feast of Purim, which was a celebration of the Jewish deliverance of the book of Esther, we again had a conjunction of Jupiter with Regulus, indicating that this Jewish king was to deliver the Jews. That was one of his purposes in coming. Finally, the third conjunction occurred on May 8th of 2 BC, the Jewish feast of Shavuot, which commemorates the day that God gave the Torah to the nation of Israel. And on that day, it also celebrated the harvest of the wheat. And the wheat was used to make the bread that was needed for the celebrations in Israel. So the bread is very closely connected with this feast of Shavuot at the end of the time of the weeks of Omar, which is the 7 weeks that occurred between the second day of Passover and May 8th, the first day of the Jewish feast of Shavuot, which in Greek is called Pentecost. Jupiter circled Regulus 3 times due to its retrograde motion, seeming to crown Regulus, a distinct sign to the Magi of the kingship with Jupiter as his star. So the Magi from this point forward would be looking to the activities of Jupiter to indicate to them where this anointed one might be if he had come. This close conjunction of Jupiter and Venus, along with the threefold conjunction of Jupiter with Regulus, would definitely have got their interest. Who basically, they would have said this Magi, a Magi would have said this anointed one was a great king, associated by the Magi with the Jews of Daniel, the Jewish king of that Daniel mentioned. Finally, a second and more spectacular conjunction of Jupiter and Venus occurred on June 17th, 2 BC, shining brightly in the constellation Leo, proclaiming to the Magi and really to the world that something great had just occurred. And it was regal in nature. It was for all the world to see. And what it was the closest conjunction of Jupiter, the king star, and Venus, the mother star, in the western sky in the constellation of Leo. Nothing like it in terms of closeness and brightness would be seen again for more than 1,500 years. The stars, Jupiter and Venus, were so close that they appeared to be as one to the naked eye. And if you're in the deserts of in and around Jerusalem and could look up in the sky, you would have seen the brightest object you'd seen except for the sun and the moon. It would have left shadows on the earth. That's how bright it was. The occurrence of this unusual sequence of events in the heavens likely caused the Magi to seek out the new king. Probably they started after seeing that star in June, proclaimed the regal kingship that had just occurred. And they would have left sometime after that, gathering all their belongings and their escorts to go to where they thought he was, which was the headquarters of the Jews, which was in Jerusalem. Now, what everybody knows from the stories we see in the modern plays about the birth of Jesus, etc., you have these three Magi come up with some helpers, and they visit on camels, etc., and they have names, all of which are really nice ways of trying to personalize what occurred. What probably occurred more likely was that there were more than three Magi. The Magi would have been accompanied by guards, military guards, a couple of battalions possibly, but certainly enough to scare the heck out of the king of Jerusalem, because the Medes, as the kingdom was known at the time, had been in battles with the Romans in the prior decades, and basically Jerusalem was near the border where the Medes and the Romans fought to a standoff. So for a king coming from, or these kings coming from the Medes, these Magi, these wise men, would have really caused a stir in Jerusalem, seeing their caravan come into the city. The trip time from where they likely lived in and around what is now Babylon or Baghdad, in that area, to Jerusalem probably would in the order of maybe a month to 2 months. After meeting with Herod in Jerusalem, the Magi were told to set out for Bethlehem by Herod's wise men, who told him that the king would be born of the root of Jesse. So Bethlehem itself was located only 5 miles south. And from the wise men's point of view, in the summer, they had lost the king star, Jupiter, and had gone behind the sun so they couldn't see it. To their surprise and delight and joy, in December, it came out from behind the sun. It's called a helalical rising, and could be seen again in the sky. And then this time now in the night sky, but toward the south, they could see it. And when they looked to the south as they walked toward the city of Bethlehem, look what they saw in the sky. The king star, Jupiter, standing directly over where the city was, shining brightly for them and sort of pointing their way. So they drove down to the city on their camels, not on their cars. But as they went toward Jerusalem, one of the things they wouldn't have known was this constellation, because it wasn't really part of the panoply of constellations they had at the time. We now call it the crux, the cross. It pointed directly to the city of Bethlehem at the time the Magi visited it. When they got there, the king star, Jupiter, appeared to stand still over the city as a result of its retrograde motion. It would look like it's standing still for about 5 days. The day they arrived, if they mention in the scriptures that the star stood still over where he was born, would have been then December 25th. And it would have continued for a period of 4 more days. So that the Magi would have brought their gifts of gold, which is an appropriate gift for a king, frankincense and myrrh seem much more odd unless you knew that this king was to be cut off, where you'd give him frankincense and myrrh to mark his death. And they worshiped the then toddler king in his house, not in a stable, on what was now called Christmas Day, at the start of the Jewish feast on that year of Hanukkah. And Hanukkah was the day the Jews celebrated and exchanged gifts, precisely as the Magi brought to them. At the end of the Anointed One's life, the heavens again displayed their notice. Mark 15 describes it. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. Many have tried to interpret that as a solar eclipse occurring in the middle of the day, which frankly is impossible, since Passover occurs at a full moon, and you can get a total lunar eclipse on a full moon, but you can't get a solar eclipse, a total solar eclipse. So whatever's being described there is something else. We think we have a pretty good idea of what that might be based on recent research. Over the last 50, 60 years, there have been another number of reports that prior to the occurrence of a significant earthquake, the sky turned dark. What happens is, in an earthquake, the ground under the surface begins to get compressed by the earthquake to breaking point. And as it does that, it creates a very strong electrical field. The electrical field ionizes the atmosphere above it, and that atmosphere then picks up dust, debris, etc., and turns it into dark clouds over the area. So it is likely that there was the precursor to the earthquake that occurred at the crucifixion of Christ was occurring under the ground at that time. And it turns out that the city that Christ was crucified in, Jerusalem, happens to be fairly high in a chemical called radon, which is a radioactive gas which actually breaks down electrically and forms what they call radon daughters. And these radon daughters can create a strong electrical field. So we have the combination of events occurring in Jerusalem, which could make this interpretation of what occurs in Mark very likely to make sense. And later that day, just toward the evening, on April 3rd, 33 AD, the sun set in the west at about 5:58 in Jerusalem, and the moon would have risen in the east, likely partially eclipsed. Since the death and resurrection of the Anointed One, there have been many signs provided to support the church he founded and encourage his followers. Importantly, in the last 500 years, the nature of that support has been supplemented. Appearances of the Mother of the Anointed One became an additional way that God communicated with his people. And here's a list of some of those that the church has approved over the years. Several of these events had visible physical phenomena associated with them. Here are the events: Guadalupe, for example, the Tilma of Guadalupe, and other events that we go down through them. Perhaps the most recent impactful event were the events that occurred at Fatima, Portugal. The events at Fatima were remarkable. I won't repeat them because I'm sure many listeners know what they were and they can find it elsewhere on the internet. But to summarize, 3 children, after being visited by an angel who visited them 3 times, encountered the Mother of the Anointed One on 6 separate occasions starting in May of 1917. Unusual physical phenomena accompanied each occasion. We have multiple reports of these phenomena from people who were there, and they were recorded at the time. They include things such as the sky appearing to get somewhat dark, the sun appearing to dim, stars appearing to appear in the sky, a cool breeze coming up, and the sound of bees coming from a tree where she was supposedly appearing. Others heard these phenomenon, and it basically makes this a very unusual apparition. In addition, on the third apparition, a secret in 3 parts was provided to the 3 children. So if you start to hear this pattern of 3 repeat itself, it occurs throughout the Fatima apparitions. The Fatima apparitions were underlining the importance of understanding the Trinity to the best you can. On the 6th occasion, on October 13th, 1917, 70,000 people witnessed a series of phenomena that have yet to be adequately explained. The events were reported on and photographed by the media of the day, and they ended up being called the miracle of the sun. Here's a photograph of some of the people who were there looking up at the sun, at the miracle of the sun, which occurred after a soaking rainfall had taken place. It had rained the day before at Fatima and stopped raining overnight, but it began raining again in the morning and then finally stopped. And when it finally stopped, the sky partially cleared, but the people were soaked and the ground was muddy in a number of places. And when it partially cleared, the sun was seen. People could look at the sun. It was seen to spin like a pinwheel in multiple colors while appearing to fall toward the earth 3 separate times. So this event occurred first when they looked up at it. It then stopped. Everybody said, oh, it was a break. And then it occurred again. Then there was another break about 3 minutes later, and it occurred again. And there was another break about 3 minutes later. So there was 3 separate occurrences of this event. When the miracle ended, the ground and the people present were completely dry, and the media left astounded. Research scientists have said that the energy required to make these people dry was multiples of the energy required in the atomic bomb blast in Hiroshima in 1945. Subsequent to that, the secrets that Fatima had became very important, and since they were publicly made noticed of in the mid-1940s. Excuse me, we'll have a sip. You have just seen hell where the souls of poor sinners go, said the secret. Lucia wrote this down in her memoirs. To save them, the Lord wishes to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart. If people do what I shall tell them, many souls will be saved and there will be peace. The war, World War I, will end soon. But if men do not stop offending the Lord, it will not be long before another and worse one begins. That will be in the pontificate of Pius XI. Pius XI died in February of 1939. When you see the night illuminated by an unknown light, know that it is the great sign which God is giving you, indicating that the world, on account of its innumerable crimes, will soon be punished by war, famine, and persecutions. And that's an illustration of what that red light would look like in the sky, as you see in the second image on this chart. The lady gave recommendations to Lucia as to how to stop the war. She said, to prevent this, I shall come to ask for the consecration of Russia to my Immaculate Heart and the communion of reparations on the first Saturdays. If my requests are heeded, Russia will be converted and there will be peace. If not, she will spread her errors throughout the world, causing wars and persecutions of the church. The good will be martyred. The Holy Father will have much to suffer. Various nations will be annihilated. But in the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. The Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me, and she shall be converted, and a period of peace will be granted to the world. And in 1925, while she was a postulant in the convent of St. Dorothy in Ponte Verde, Sister Lucia had a follow-on visit. And the lady said the following: those who for 5 consecutive first Saturdays confess, receive Holy Communion, pray the Holy Rosary, and accompany for 15 minutes by meditating on the mysteries of the Holy Rosary with the intention to do reparation. I promise to assist him at the hour of death with the graces needed for salvation. So she basically upped the ante there. She said, if you do this, I will get you the graces necessary for salvation from her son. Because she wanted it to be done so much because the world was in such dire straits. On March 25th, 1984, Pope John Paul, along with a large number of Catholic and Orthodox bishops, conducted a consecration of the world to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. However, John Paul II didn't specifically mention Russia. So since that time, there's been a lot of controversy whether this consecration was ever completed. There is on the internet, for example, a video of Sister Lucia chatting with a friend of mine, John Zugaby. And Doc Zugaby asked her about that, and she suggested consecration was done. But to those that don't necessarily accept those things, here's another thing to take a look at. The heavens may have provided an answer for the acceptance of the consecration on May 13th, 1984, less than 2 months later, when there was a report on July 10th that there was a crippling explosion that effectively grounded the Northern Fleet, the strongest of the Soviet Navy's 4 high-sea fleets. He said that it occurred on May 13th in an ammunition depot at Severomorsk, northeast of Murmansk, on the Kola Peninsula. It was the Severomorsk served as the base for the Northern Fleet, and basically Jane's military publication said that the explosions, which lasted about 3 days, took out 2/3 of the Soviets' ground-to-air missiles that were associated with the Northern Fleet, a number of their cruise missiles, a number of munitions for their various battle cruisers and cruisers, basically causing them to be ineffective for a number of years. And it may be that event, which was the intervention of heaven in Russian occurrences. A portion of the secret was not revealed in the 1940s. It was partially revealed in 2000. And again, you can go on the internet to read all this. I won't read it to you, but it talks about the Pope, the cardinals, the bishops, the priests, and some of the laity murdered by a group of soldiers who fired bullets and arrows at them. And they died as they were on their way to a cross, which is on a hill, after walking through a city that had been half destroyed. So it talks about a very dire time, and it's hard to interpret. At the time, the Vatican said this probably had occurred already, but Pope Benedict in 2010 said the secret to Fatima has still to be fulfilled in its entirety. In 2015, as if to sort of confirm Pope Benedict's discussion, more details involving the contents of the third secret were revealed. Sister Lucia wrote down, this was written in 1944, kept by the Carmel nuns until they were revealed at the end of 2014. It says, I felt my spirit flooded with a light-filled mystery, which is God. And in him I saw and heard the point of a flame-like lance, which detaches, touches the axis of the earth, and the earth shakes. Mountains, cities, towns, and villages with their inhabitants are buried. Seas and rivers and clouds leave their bounds. They overflow, flood, and drag with them into a whirlpool, houses and people in number unable to be counted. It's the purification of the world from the sin it is immersed in. By hatred, ambition, cause destructive wars. So Lucia was describing a whole series of extraordinary natural events, as well as the human event of war, causing all this destruction. That appeared to correspond to what was described by Pope John Paul in Fulda in 1980. And the Pope describes what Lucia described there fairly closely. He says, on the other hand, it should be sufficient for all Christians to know this. If there is a message in which it is written that oceans will flood the whole areas of the earth, and from one moment to the next, millions of people will perish, truly the publication of such a message is no longer something so much to be desired. He said, those who seek satisfaction of their curiosity are not what you should be doing. This is dangerous if at the same time they are not disposed to do something, and if they are convinced that it is impossible to do anything against evil. At this point, the Pope took his rosary and said, "Here is the remedy against evil. Pray, pray, and ask nothing more. Leave everything else to the Mother of God," because, in effect, at this point, she's the only one who can affect it. Others who were involved in matters related to the secret of Fatima had further disclosures. Pope Paul VI, on October 13th, 1977, stated the following: "The tail of the devil is functioning in the disintegration of the Catholic world. The darkness of Satan has entered and spread through the Catholic Church, even to its summit." And then in 1995, Cardinal Mario Luigi Chiappi said, in a letter he wrote to Professor Baumgartner in Salzburg, Austria, "In the third secret, it is revealed, among other things, that the great apostasy in the church will begin at the top." And February 8th, Cardinal Carlo Caffarra, who recently passed away, reported on his role in starting the Pontifical Institute for the Study of Marriage and the Family. He had written a letter to Sister Lucia to ask her to pray for his efforts, and he received a very long letter in reply in which she said, "The final battle between the Lord and the reign of Satan will be about marriage and the family. Don't be afraid," she added, "because anyone who works for the sanctity of marriage and the family will always be fought and opposed in every way, because this is a decisive issue." And then she concluded, "However, Our Lady has already crushed its head." In a subsequent event in Akita, which occurred is in Japan, an event occurred which confirmed Fatima. Again, I urge you to go on the internet to research Akita. It basically talks about a nun who went into Sister Agnes Sasagawa, who was a lay lady at the time and who had been taken ill and found herself going into a coma. And in the coma, she said she saw herself lying in a field of flowers, which appeared to be trying to gobble her up. And when she started to pray, the flowers sort of left her alone. And as she continued to pray, she prayed the rosary. She said she finally woke up from her coma. And when she woke up, the lady who was kneeling next to her was the lady she heard in her dreams saying, "Pray the rosary." That lady then told her later on, "Pray very much for the Pope, bishops, and priests. Continue to pray very, very much. In order that the world might know his anger, the Heavenly Father is preparing to inflict a great chastisement on all mankind. With my son, I have intervened so many times to appease the wrath of the Father." Finally, on October 13th, she added the following: "Fire will fall from the sky and wipe out a greater part of humanity, the good as well as the bad, sparing neither priests nor faithful." And she goes on to say, "The work of the devil will infiltrate even the church in such a way that one will see cardinals opposing cardinals and bishops opposing bishops." So clearly, a vision and an occurrence that occurred that seems to parallel what Fatima was saying earlier on. There are many private revelations. There are over 400 of them that talk about events like this. St. Hildegard of Bingen talks about a comet coming. The good accepted will be scourged by want and famine. The great nation in the ocean that is inhabited by peoples of different tribes and descent will be devastated by earthquake, storm, and tidal wave. It will be divided and in great part submerged. That nation will also have many misfortunes and lose its colonies. For hundreds of years, researchers thought that referred to England, because England was clearly a nation made up of very many people and had colonies. But more recently, researchers had begun to think that that may be the United States. La Salette talks about the same kind of event. And somebody who's up for entering the process of applying for a saint is Rosalia Chelnawoka, who in 1938 talks about the same kind of event occurring. What's interesting is that she talks about a country dedicating itself to Christ the King, the anointed one as the king of the country. And what's interesting about all that is that on November 20th, 2016, the Polish government and the religious leadership of the country formally dedicated Poland to Christ the King. It is the only country in the world I know that did that. There have been other private revelations which appear to describe a similar event. I'll just show them on the screen for a few seconds. We won't go through them. At this point, we'll talk about signs in the heavens and in the future, signs in the heavens right now. But let's take a commercial break for a few seconds before we continue.
Faith Life Family Wear is a faith-based crusted clothing accessory line that promotes our faith, life, family, and traditional marriage through fashion appropriate for both work and play. Shop now to look great, evangelize, and support Fiat Ministry Network. Share the good news about our website with your friends to encourage everyone to take a stand with style.
As we have seen in several of her writings, Sister Lucia noted that the times described by Fatima's secret was revealed previously in the book of Revelations, chapters 8 through 13, excuse me. Chapter 12 talks about a great portent appearing in the heavens, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And we're going to visit that symbolism in a minute. The book of Revelation is replete with this symbolic imagery and is typical of this type of apocalyptic writing. In the book of Daniel, which also uses similar imagery, the author refers to the priestly class as stars. That's in Daniel 12:3. According to St. Methodius, the stars that fall are symbols of heresies. And we see another portent that the creature that appears in heaven, his tail was swept down a third of the stars and cast them to the earth. So it appears at the time of the sign of the woman clothed in the sun will likely announce the time of heresies that will challenge the foundations of the church. The fallen priests and bishops who will follow the evil one will be lax and will induce many of the laity to be lax as well. In this period of apostasy, which will deceive millions, Father Kramer, after 30 years of study of the Revelation, concluded that this period could be the period of revolt of which St. Paul wrote about many, many years ago. With that sort of as a background now, let's talk about a few future signs in the heavens. First of all, 2017 is a very important year. It marks a number of key anniversaries. It's the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther's Reformation movement. It's the 300th anniversary of the enthronement of Our Lady of Czestochowa as Queen of Poland. It's the 300th anniversary of the founding of the Masonic Grand Lodge in London. It's the 100th anniversary of the apparitions of Our Lady of Fatima. It's the 100th anniversary of the Communist Revolution. And it's the first anniversary of the dedication of Poland to Christ the King. As if to underline the importance of the year, as we saw 2,000 years ago, the retrograde motion of Jupiter, this time around the brightest star of the Virgin, Virgo, creates a triple conjunction and a halo over Spica, while Jupiter is still inside the Virgin. Remember, Jupiter represents the regent king. The Virgo is the woman, the sign of fertility, and he's still inside her. He's inside her for 9 months, and then he emerges on September 6th from Virgo. We'll go back to that right after we talk about something that occurs next. On August 21st, 2017, a more visually impressive display occurred. For the first time in 99 years, a total solar eclipse crossed the conterminous United States. In ancient times, in the times of the Assyrians, for example, such event would have been seen as an awesome and ominous portent. They would have thought the land was to be flooded, that the king was to die, that the city gates would be knocked down. In short, tumult was to occur. In addition, during total solar eclipses, in the area of totality, the sky is darkened, stars can actually be seen, and it turns out that this eclipse was right next to Regulus in the constellation of Leo. So here we have the regal star in the constellation of royalty, basically showing up during this particular eclipse, occurring solely over the United States. If you look at the chart next to the eclipse picture, you can see the eclipse starting in the Pacific Ocean, crossing the conterminous United States from Oregon all the way down to South Carolina, and going out over the Atlantic Ocean where it dissipates before hitting land again. So only the people of the United States can really see it in its totality. In addition to all these things happening, stars being seen, etc., the local temperature will fall up to 10 degrees Fahrenheit or so. Animals and plants behave as if it's night. They get confused. And a cool breeze is often observed, which was observed in this particular eclipse, in fact. Now, what's interesting is the time 40 days after the August eclipse, the same 40 days that Jonah talked about when he said that Nineveh had 40 days before it was to be held to account. The 40 days after the August eclipse is September 29th, which marks the Jewish day of Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement in the Jewish tradition, as well as Michaelmas, the feast of St. Michael and the other archangels, which was the conclusion of St. Michael's Lent during the Middle Ages. They actually usually went from the Feast of the Assumption to the Feast of the Holy Angels on September 29th, and they basically have a second Lent, a smaller Lent, during that 55-day period. One of the readings at the Catholic Mass on the 29th is telling. It says, war broke out in heaven. It's from Revelation. Michael and his angels battle against the dragon. The dragon and its angels fought back, but they did not prevail, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. The huge dragon, the ancient serpent who was called the devil and Satan, who deceived the whole world, was thrown down to earth, and his angels were thrown down with it. So it talks about Satan being basically removed from heaven and bound to the earth. Moreover, the involvement of St. Michael's feast at the end of this 40-day period brings back to mind Daniel's prophecy of the role of Michael, the archangel, in the end times. Or in the times that Daniel's talking about. This is in Daniel 12. It says, at that time there shall arise Michael, the great prince, the guardian of your people. It should be a time of unsurpassed and distress since the nation began until that time. At that time your people shall escape, everyone who is found written in the book. Now recall that Daniel's people at the time were the Jews, but the anointed one was Daniel's holy leader, and the anointed one is Jesus the Christ. So it's now talking about the Christians as part of the nation who shall be subject to distress. And it further strengthens the connection between the eclipse event and the subsequent events that occur after it. The sign mentioned in Revelation 12:1 occurs about a month after the eclipse, at least it appears to, on the morning of September 23rd. It just occurred last weekend, when the heavens will display the virgin woman with 12 stars over her head, the sun shining behind her, and the moon under her feet, just as described in Revelation 12:1. Here's the picture of the sky that you could see if you could turn off the effects of the atmosphere on the sun. This is as if you were in heaven looking out at the stars from Earth. You'd see this alignment that's unusual, and it's shown by this software I'll mention to you later. It's called Stellarium, and it shows Leo, the star Regulus, the king star or the royal star, the wandering stars of Venus, Mars, and Mercury, the sun, Spica, Jupiter just exiting from the body of Virgo, the Virgin, and below the Virgin at her feet is the moon. At this point in time, the moon would have been about 11 to 12% exposed, so it would have looked like a crescent moon under her feet, almost identical to the description you see in Revelation 12:1. But like Christmas, the Christmas star, the Star of Bethlehem, it signifies an event. The times have changed. It doesn't necessarily say that everything on that day is going to be magical things occurring or weird things occurring. It simply signifies an event has occurred. The event that occurs here may be the binding of Satan or his period of him to be bound, and also announces the coming of the age of Mary, which has been prophesied for at least 1,000 years to occur at some time before the evil one comes. So we're not talking here about the end of the world or the end of the age or the coming of the great evil one. We're talking about the age of Mary and eventually an age of peace. If we follow the book of Revelation, after this sign is seen, a great red dragon appears and wishes to devour the woman's child, probably indicating a period of conflict within the church and tribulation around the world before the dragon is finally thrown down. So we're going to have to, unfortunately, this says we're going to go through that. And I thought at the time, well, anybody, this seems like a bunch of hooey. Let's look into it. I looked into it for like a 300-year period, couldn't find any replications of this sign in the heaven. And I found others who charted it and went back thousands of years, both back and forward thousands of years, and were unable to find any time but 2017 as the only time when all these key signs, there's actually more, but these 4 key signs occur. The woman is clothed in the sun. She's pregnant, meaning the Jupiter is inside the body of Virgo. It's crowned with 12 stars, and the moon's under her feet. And again, as I said before, only in 2017 did this combination of events occur or appear to occur, indicating to us that we're probably looking at the sign described in Revelation 12:1, and that means the events to follow are likely to follow. This event occurs during the Jewish days of repentance between Rosh Hashanah, as I mentioned before, and Yom Kippur, and specifically occurs on the day marked for the fast of Gedaliah, which mourns the murder of Nebuchadnezzar II's appointed governor of Judah in 587 BC on the Jewish calendar. Because it was celebrated, the day it was celebrated this year, the Jews wouldn't have celebrated because it was on Shabbat. But otherwise, it would have been celebrated as a fast in the Jewish calendar, and it reminds us of Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel and the destruction of Jerusalem. Because what Nebuchadnezzar did after the Jews killed his appointed governor of Jerusalem, of Judah, he went in and leveled the city, took all the rest of the people in the city captive, and brought them back to Babylon with him. This whole period is meant to be a time of personal introspection, leading to repentance, prayer, and charity, and reconnects us to the time of Daniel and his dreams of the Anointed One. One day prior to the 100th anniversary of the miracle of the sun on October 13th, a small asteroid, anywhere from 50 to 90 feet long, will come within 27,000 miles of the Earth, which in space terms is a very close encounter. It's one of the close, you can see bolides, which are smaller than this, burn in the atmosphere that look like flaming stars. But this is a bigger rock than this, and it seems to indicate that maybe it's a precursor of something to come. About 6 2/3 years later, after the August 21st eclipse, another total solar eclipse will again occur across the United States. It occurs on April 8th of 2024 and goes from Mexico all the way across the United States out through Maine, as you can see depicted here, and crosses over southwest corner of Illinois, right near the New Madrid fault zone. These two eclipses combined appear to be making either an X across the United States or a chi. A chi, by the way, is the first letter of how the Greeks spelled Christos, the Anointed One's name, which appears to indicate a roughly 7-year period where the United States must repent and either choose to follow the Anointed One or maybe cease to exist as one nation. The choice is ours. Further, the description of future events described by Sister Agnes Sasagawa, Sister Lucia, and others appears to be quite extreme and almost unbelievable. When you read about what's supposed to happen, it's like, that's never happened before, it's impossible. Turns out, however, that something similar to it did occur about 12,800 years ago. And it initiated a 1,200-year-long period of planetary cooling called the Younger Dryas, caused by a comet strike which hit along the Laurentide Glacier in what is now central Michigan, not too far from Saginaw. This comet hit the Earth, exploded as you see depicted here by this NASA image, and threw all sorts of debris up. It obviously pulverized parts of the Laurentide Glacier, melting ice all over the world, causing massive water flows. But in addition to throwing debris all over north, south, east, and west of the hit point, this debris came down on the Earth and caused all sorts of problems on the Earth, causing fires everywhere. In fact, there was a culture called the Clovis culture, which lived not too far from the border of the glacial border and the rest of the land. And that Clovis culture, which had existed for 5,000 or 6,000 years before this, disappeared overnight in a basically what looks like a period of fire and flame, smoke, soot, debris, and all sorts of atmospheric phenomena that were very unusual and are described in some of the ancient lore of the Indians. This debris actually fell all across what is now the United States along the southeast coast, occurring from South Carolina and North Carolina, where they were first noticed. And they're called the Carolina Bays. And what they are indentations in the earth that are sort of teardrop shaped, with the apex of the teardrops pointing back toward Michigan. And by triangulation, you can actually see where this debris fell back to the earth from. In addition to all of this, as was mentioned in Akita, we now seem to be in a period where cardinals have begun to oppose cardinals and bishops are opposing bishops, etc., indicating we're probably entering the time period where it is possible that fire will fall from the sky. So, the signs in the heavens we've identified may indicate that a period of major geophysical change is about to occur: confusion, conflict, heresy, and even war. What can we do? As Pope John Paul II said, if you're just interested out of curiosity, you're wasting your time. You need to do something about it. Remembering that these signs in the heavens are intended to inform and assist us so we can prepare for any eventuality, here are some suggestions gleaned from some of the sayings that the Blessed Virgin Mary left and others. And just choose these to follow. Get closer to the Anointed One by developing a life of prayer. Pray the Rosary and the Divine Mercy Chaplet daily, and take up Eucharistic adoration. Frequent the sacraments of reconciliation and Holy Eucharist. You can do this if you're a Catholic easily. Pray for the Pope, the Church, and the United States, and all your brothers and sisters, all of you. Develop a devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary through the prayers of the Rosary and through personal acts of reparation. For 5 consecutive first Saturdays, go to confession, receive Holy Communion, pray the Holy Rosary, and accompany the Mother of the Anointed One for 15 minutes by meditating on the mysteries of the Rosary to offer reparation. This 40-day period from the eclipse through Yom Kippur is nearly coming to an end, but use the days between now and Yom Kippur, which is this Friday, as a personal Lent and as an act of personal reparation. Beyond that, continue to celebrate Fridays and mark Fridays as days of reparation and sacrifice. And after having done all that, place all your trust in God and His Mother and live joyfully. And remember, if my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face, I will turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, and I will forget their sin and heal their land. And remember Michael, the prince. Remember his prayer brought to us by Pope Louis XIII. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle, be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. That's the end of this presentation, but there are many more signs to come. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Bryan. That was absolutely fabulous. And of course, I have questions. Surprise! Yeah.
Let me have a drink.
I had to turn off my microphone to keep from interjecting. It just drove me crazy. Okay, so first of all, when you said the anniversaries, I think we need to remember too, sadly, I think when you said the 100th anniversary of Freemasonry, it's also the 100th anniversary of Planned Parenthood. Sadly. Right. Yeah. Right. So that's no mistake. Okay. So we were, looking at the app because of course our, not being in the suburbs, we couldn't see the stars clearly on September 23rd, St. Padre Pio's feast day. Mm-hmm. We were looking and that's just for everyone, that was the sign was in Revelation 12 that you mentioned, the woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet. It happened then. It also looked like it was happening through the 24th as well. I don't know if the app
23rd is the first day, and typically you mark these on the first day. But okay. It'll go a while because again, you've got heavenly bodies moving. They're going to move relatively slowly. But once the moon in particular moves fairly quickly through the sky. And so as a result, you're not going to last for too long, maybe a day or two.
Okay. So what are we supposed to interpret from that? Because we were like, oh my goodness, it's really happening. And then we're like, okay, well, what does that mean?
It's a mark of a new era. It's the mark of the age of Mary. The age of Mary, according to a number of prophecies, but I didn't go through any of these today, it will begin with conflict. It's basically to make reparation for all that's gone on in the previous 500 years, that the church will be chastised, all of humanity will be chastised during this period. There'll be a war in all likelihood, given what's been described. The end of the war will likely, there will likely be a period of darkness caused by the beginning of eruptions of volcanoes, etc., on a scale not seen before. At the end of all that, the darkness will clear. The earth will be really a place that you wouldn't want to visit very often. It's really going to look uninhabitable. It'll take time for the earth to come back, but there'll be people around. Not a lot, but many. And over time, those people will live in peace. They will be guided by a holy pope and a great leader who comes out of Europe. And that holy pope and great leader will lead the church through a period of peace. It is at the end of that, which is mentioned in La Salette, that an evil one will come to disturb the peace. And that's the beginning of the time of Satan's reign.
So I'm confused. The Immaculate Heart will triumph.
Correct.
When is that?
After the sky is dark and after the earth is now basically almost barren, she triumphs. It's a period of peace. Okay, so you're saying she triumphs, but then after she triumphs, I thought, okay, all is good. That's it. Now it's all happy time. But you're saying after the Immaculate Heart triumphs, that then evil will come back in? Yes. Oh, no. The unbinding of Satan. It's a long way off, or potentially a long way off. Timing unknown. Only the Father knows the timing. But it's prophesied to occur. Yeah. Well, I know when I was watching it at our church, I leaned over to my friend and I went, before we got to the very last, part of the presentation where you actually give hope and everything, I leaned over to her and I said, well, it's been nice knowing you. It was a little grim, but that's the beauty of our Catholic faith is then you give the list of the things, the dues, the praying the rosary, the, Eucharistic adoration, the frequenting the sacraments and everything. So to the extent we do that, we can ameliorate these events, may even delay them a significant amount of time. Exactly. And the reason for St. Michael's Lent, I mean, we've been doing the 54-day novena, as I know you have been, as well. And we are supposed to be doing a St. Michael's Lent, the fasting and all of that. We're always supposed to be offering. I mean, that's what the children of Fatima did, offering up our sacrifices and penances for the conversion of sinners. I mean, we all have family and friends, but throughout the world, everyone needs help. We all need help. We're all sinners. So, all right, let me look at here. Okay. So one other thing, why should we accept this analysis? Why should we listen to you? Who are you? Why tell me, why should we listen to this? First thing, you don't have to. Yeah, right? This is my it's for everyone's discernment, right? It's for everybody to understand, but based upon research I've done, I was an astronomer when I was a kid and all that kind of stuff. I was into astronomy. While I'm not particularly an expert in any one of these fields, and a number of these fields, I know enough to say these points seem to connect. This seems to make sense, and it puts all the pieces in the right sequence, and everything seems to work. And particularly if you follow it from the time of Daniel and see all the events that occurred that Daniel prophesied, then see the Magi following it through, understanding the signs the way they occurred, the way the Magi would, and now applying that same logic, you come to my point of view, a relatively incontrovertible conclusion that what we've just witnessed in the sky is the dawn of the era of Mary. How long it lasts, I can't tell you. That's up to us, I think, in part. But be aware that it starts with turmoil. It's not going to be easy.
Yeah, it's not going to be a party. Okay, so now, well, the one thing about the earthquake, I had no idea that the sky gets dark, and that was interesting. I thought at the crucifixion it was, an eclipse or something, but when you hear about the earthquake and all of that, that was interesting.
That's nothing to do with any religious topic. That's actual research done by physicists who try to understand, for example, why a sky gets dark when an earthquake, because there's been a number of reports of sky getting dark with earthquakes around the world. It doesn't happen every time. Yeah. It depends upon the geology in place, the kind of electrical chemistry you've got in place. All those kind of things have to work. But in the right kind of location at the right time, you get this phenomenon.
It's interesting.
Real.
And when you said about, I know when you gave the talk at St. Joseph's, you mentioned that the comet, some of the debris, 1,200 years ago, some of the debris.
12,000.
12,000. What did I say? 1,200.
Please.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Please. Let me get it right. 1,200, 12,000, whatever. Yeah. But some of it landed. It was found in down the street from our church. We all kind of looked at each other and thought, okay, what does that mean? Let's switch locations because this is like X marks the spot. You're in big trouble, or just no big deal. It kind of debris went everywhere, and it just
debris went everywhere, and we happened to find someone near where you live.
Okay,
most of it was developed over, so it was gone. But fortunately, these aerial photographs were taken in the late 1940s and enabled people to see for the first time these very odd-looking shapes that look like little ponds and big ponds located all over North Carolina, South Carolina, some in Virginia, et cetera. So you could actually see this. And by connecting it all, it goes right back up toward Michigan.
What in the world? Are they marked, the locations? I mean,
no.
No, there's no markers. There's historical markers all over the place, but we don't have that. Okay.
Nope.
Okay. All right.
People don't want to be reminded.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, out of sight, out of mind. Okay. So, well, the final battle being, we're told, about marriage and family. And when you said that, I thought, and that was one of the very reasons why I came up with the crest, Faith Life Family Wear, because, I thought it had to be on the crest about marriage and about family and, traditional marriage and family. So that's interesting that you brought that up. Okay. So my last suggestion. Mm-hmm. Since Poland seems to be the place that we should all be moving because they're the only ones that have dedicated their country to,
I'm not selling Polish real estate, by the way.
That's right. I don't know. It's looking better and better. If I didn't dread the cult so much, I'd be thinking of hoofing it over there. But so who does it take to dedicate? I mean, do we just, do I call up Cardinal Burke and beg him, come dedicate the U.S. to
more than that?
Christ the King? It has to be the Pope. Does it really?
No, more than that. In each country, like in Poland, the Pope wasn't involved. It was the cardinals and the bishops of Poland, plus the president and vice president of Poland. They came together in a service on November 20th, 2016, to dedicate Poland to Christ the King.
So it takes, no, I mean, where is that written? Where does it say? It has to be more than one, because I'm thinking, good luck getting a whole bunch of cardinals together. But, I'm just thinking Cardinal Burke. Okay, I'll call Trump. President Trump, I'll beg him, But I mean, honestly, should we be trying to get our country dedicated to Christ the King?
We should try to convert the United States.
Yeah, well, that's what we pray for we pray for a great deal.
The answer is yes.
Okay. All right. So we have our work cut out for us. We'll start. Yes. We'll start working on this. Okay. All right. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to this? I think you've given us quite a bit, but anything else any other questions you can think of that I should have asked?
Just pray, pray, pray. That's, I mean, follow Pope John Paul II's recommendation.
Yeah.
And leave all else to the Mother of God.
And St. Padre Pius, pray, hope, and don't worry.
Right.
Right. We just had his feast day, September 23rd. But I've got the pray and the hope down. It's the don't worry. I always have to work on that one. It's a little tough.
Yeah, same here. Same here.
Yeah, not that good at that. So anyway, okay. So, I was going to close with the St. Michael the Archangel prayer since his feast day is coming up, and he's always over my shoulder here. But instead, why don't we'll close with the Glory Be, and I will beg that you please come on before Christmas and give the presentation that you normally do about the Star of Bethlehem and all of that. That would be great.
Be happy to.
Great. All right. It's a date. Okay. All right. In the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Glory be to the Father and to the Son and to the Holy Ghost, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, we love you. Please save souls. In the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Thank you again, Bryan. God bless you.
God bless you.
And thank you, everyone, for watching. Again, if you'd like a DVD of this program, feel free to email us at missy@flfware.com or Kent@fiatministrynetwork.tv. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and donate. Click that donate button on the Fiat Ministry Network website, because we can't do what we do without you. Thank you so much. God bless you, and good night.